How's it going, everybody? This is the Nitty Gritty. My name is Chad, and with me is Leonard. If you're watching this now, Christmas is over, so I hope everybody had a nice holiday and is looking forward to the end of the year, I'm sure. And so this week, before we get to our topic, we should mention that Leonard was kind enough to give me a cameo gift for Christmas, and that was of Tito Santana. So if you remember our episode where we discussed Tito's WrestleMania matches and ranked them, that was basically what the cameo talked about, but it ended up getting a lot more traction, right, Leonard?
Yes. First of all, I want to give a big shout out to Tito for doing that.
Absolutely.
You did it within 2 hours of me ordering it, and you only have about a tweet's worth to get the info in that you want. So I know he didn't watch the episode, even though I referenced it. But he talked about how he was the only one to wrestle the first time WrestleManias other than Hulk Hogan. He talked about how he had the first match in WrestleMania history, which are all things we talked about in the episode. I thought it was just, it was everything that I would want it to be when I ordered it. And I thought that was the least I could do for you, bringing me along on this great adventure that we've had so far. But then the next thing with that was Jim Cornette's podcast, The Drive-Thru. I believe he's got two. I believe it's the Drive-Thru one.
Yeah.
That they were, Jim has been encouraged to do cameo by people, and he doesn't think he can devote the time to it. So his co-host, Brian Last, was showing him, well, here's who on there. Here's what they're charging. Here's some samples. And they get to Tito Santana. I'm like, there's no way in hell they play the one that Tito did for us. And they did. So inadvertently, we got a huge plug on Jim Cornette's podcast via Tito talking about it through the cameo for Chad. They didn't mention the show. They just kind of talked about how Tito's delivery was and all that. I did email them and thank them for the inadvertent plug.
Oh, did you? Okay.
Out the show. I haven't heard anything back from Jim or Brian, but I did email them and say thank you.
Well, even though it was an accident, we thank them for that for sure. Mm-hmm. And hey, you know what? The word is spreading about our little show here.
Yeah, and also to mention, we got a shout out from Brian Zane over at Wrestling with Regret. He's been doing a thing asking for fan mail, old-fashioned fan mail from people. So I wrote him a letter telling him about the show, asking for his feedback. At least for me, he's been an inspiration. So he was nice enough to read that letter on his video for fan mail, the number 2 video for fan mail, and plugged the show that way. And I also sent him a incomplete set of 1991 WCW cards that he admitted were in very good shape. That was kind of the grease the wheels a little bit. But that was a purposeful endorsement from Brian Zane, or I should say plug from Brian Zane. So, thank him for that.
Yeah, absolutely. We thank him for that. And, when I was looking at other wrestler cameos on there, I was like, oh man, should I get Leonard a cameo? And the only other one that was affordable was James Ellsworth. So I was like, I'm not going to do that to him because that's not really a gift that anybody wants. No offense.
I almost got that from my friend Dan as a joke. Because I was looking at all of them on there, and he's the only other one that I would have probably put money out for just based on the cost.
Right.
And when they were doing this on Jim Cornette's show, Brian Last was trying to get Jim to guess how much people were, and he was flipping out about how much various people were.
Right.
Considering, like, he was going, well, how come this guy who had a cup of coffee with WWE is more than this guy who's a Hall of Famer and all, you know? And Brian had to explain, it's not who you are, it's who you think you are. Right. So it's how much money I don't think they monitor how much people charge. It's whatever you want to charge. But
yeah,
I would guarantee that Tito does tons, because he's a great bargain for being a Hall of Famer and the career that he had, and for what he charges. I'll just say he only charges $25, which is amazing.
Right. Yeah. And hey, yeah, if nobody knows that he's on there and that he is, on the affordable end, hey, absolutely go check out his videos and certainly float him a little love.
Yeah.
So our topic this week is kind of in relation to our commentator show that we did. This time we're going to touch on ring announcers and backstage interviewers. And again, we're probably not going to go over every single person to do these, but we are going to hit the major ones or the memorable ones and go from there. So we should start with, I think, ring announcers.
Yeah.
And for me, ring announcers, it kind of boils down to Howard Finkel and everyone else. And that's not to discount everybody else. But before we get to some of the names, I'll just say that a lot of the announcers these days, or the ones that kind of come and gone, like you tend not to notice them very much or think about them very much if they're average.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not necessarily a knock on them, but when they just do their job and it's uncomplicated and they might not have the most distinct voice, then you don't really notice them. And I think that that's a little quality that is good to have in today's product, is somebody that you notice and that you look for. You want to, like, as a wrestler, as a talent, I imagine you would want to hear Howard Finkel announce you as the winner. I imagine that would be a really cool thing. Even thinking back to when CM Punk brought him out as a guest announcer for his name when he was facing Alberto Del Rio. Of course, back then, Alberto had his own announcer, Ricardo Rodriguez. Right. And so during one of their matches, CM Punk brought out Howard Finkel, which was a cool little thing because he's such an iconic voice. So I like it when they add their own spin to the verbiage and kind of show their personality a bit. But what do you think, Leonard? Are you more like, are you also like, the Fink and everybody else, or?
Yeah, well, I have two in mind when I think of ring announcers. Fink's one, we'll get to the other. But it's kind of what we talked about with commentators and with referees some too. You notice the good ones and the bad ones, not the ones in the middle. And it seems like, especially WWE right now, is trying to make all what I would call the ancillary talent very, very nondescript. They don't want them to have personalities. They don't want them to have names. They don't want you to know who they are. Right. And I think they add something to the product. I mean, with a ring announcer, they say who it is, where they're from, and their weight, and then tell you the outcome of the match. But there can still be a lot of important elements in that, as my edge poster loses its corner there. But now it's even creepier with the way he's slanted.
It is.
And as I lose my train of thought, but yeah, with Howard Finkel, I was going to say that I've heard several backstage people with WWE, I think Bruce Pritchard is one, say that when they would have a new guy come in and have a name, that they would do what they called the Fink test. Could you close your eyes and picture Howard Finkel saying winner and new, because he always punched that new,
right?
WWE World Heavyweight Champion Mantar or Outback Jack, Yeah. And that would tell you, yeah, this is a good name or not a good name. And I think he talked about that as the edge poster finally falls. Talked about that with Stone Cold Steve Austin, that has been legendary, that they had some sort of a group come up with a name for him, and it was Chili McFreeze, which I always thought was a joke. I believe several real people have said, no, that was a thing. So, what sells better, winner and new WWE champion Chili McFreeze or Stone Cold Steve Austin?
Right.
Howard Finkel say it. So, yeah, definitely. And as we go name, just to talk about the Fink, I think one is longevity.
Yeah.
Two, it's his voice. He had just a very distinctive booming voice. And three, I think even though he didn't get a lot of screen time, he was very engaging. I think the guys backstage liked him. I think the fans liked him. So if you're going to be an announcer, a ring announcer, I think those are the three key things you need. You need the voice, you need the longevity, and you just need to be engaging even if you're not doing a lot.
Right. And you were saying about longevity. And I think that really helps some of these announcers, even if you might not have grown up with them. Like, if you think about some of these names that we're about to talk about, they were around for a while, so you remember them just based on the fact that they were around for a while in their in that position. But yeah, I mean, the voice is key. And as we'll talk about, some of the people on this list, they have more distinct voices, more booming voices than others. And that's such an important factor. And, you talked about some of the announcers today, and I agree with what you were saying. And, the people that WWE uses today is, Greg Hamilton and Mike Rome, I think is the other gentleman's name. And like I said, they're fine. And, Greg Hamilton had that little thing with Shane McMahon there for a while where, it's so like, he's not bad, but I think that there maybe is, I hate to say there's a little passion missing, but that's the only way I can really describe it accurately. Like when the Fink would announce somebody as a champion, you felt it. You felt the enthusiasm. It was there. Some of the times these guys, when they're announcing the winner, they just do it, and, it is what it is. So on the note, when we did commentators, we started with more modern and worked our way back. We already talked about the Fink, but we'll do the more modern again. The other modern person that AEW uses, and he was also in WWE for a long time, is Justin Roberts. And I always thought Justin Roberts was okay. I remember my friend who worked at a hotel near Hershey, Justin Roberts came to the hotel and he was able to get tickets for he and I to one of the shows that was in Hershey. So it made me, remember Justin Roberts all that more just because of that. But he's fine. I think that he has a more distinct voice than the guys currently in WWE. That's my opinion. But what do you think about Justin Roberts?
To steal a phrase from The Authority, I think he's a B+ player. He's right there below the A level.
Yeah.
I think he could get there. Again, longevity, if he continues to stick with it.
Yeah.
And AEW continues to rise as a prominent company. I do think he has a distinctive voice to a degree, but I don't know if I could pick it out of the lineup. If you played me a bunch of voices, I don't know if I could pick out his like I could pick out Fink's.
Right.
So, and I do think that he is someone that has been around long enough so far that I think fans know who he is.
Yeah.
So again, I think he's not top tier, but I think he's right there. And I think if he stays in the business and continues to work for top flight companies, I think by the end of his career, he's not going to be the Fink, but he's going to be maybe 1A to the 1,
Yeah, no, that's certainly very possible. So from there, I guess we can't really go in order from this point on, but let's talk about Tony Chimmel. And he was mostly on SmackDown, I believe, but I'm sure he did maybe he did Raw from time to time, but he was mostly on SmackDown. And again, Tony Chimmel was fine. This is weird to say. His claim to fame as an announcer was Edge. The rated R, superstar, like that was his most memorable, announcement, I guess. So other than that, he was fine. I have no complaints really. Again, there's a lot of these guys that are, as I said at the beginning, are just average.
Yeah.
So, and I would put him into that. He's not bad. He's not great. He did put his own spin on certain names, Edge being the most prominent. I can't think of any other off the top of my head, but I'm sure there were. But what do you think, Tony Chimmel?
Yeah, again, average category for me. I forgot all about the rated R superstar
right
until you mentioned it. So, yeah, not a whole lot I can say. Again, he falls in that average range. I think he was very serviceable, but I think I was getting to a point where they didn't want them to stand out so much. I don't think he got a lot of credit for being there outside of maybe at the beginning of the show, like the quick name flash. Hey, it's Tony Chimmel, but that's it.
I think they brought him back for a show at one point, a reunion show maybe, or something to that effect, or an anniversary show. And, everybody just kind of wanted him to do the rated R superstar thing. And, they all cheered or whatever when he did that. But, yeah, I mean, like the commentators, I guess this is a Vince call in that he wants these guys to be nondescript, I should say, and very bland to a certain extent.
Yeah, they're not I think the reasoning is they're not the talent.
Right. And
They are, but they aren't.
I get that. But at the same time, I think a little, flair, no pun intended, helps.
Be a
Like
little fair.
all these little details to me,
Mhm.
I think add up to one of the reasons why wrestling is maybe not as popular and must see as it is. Is it solely because of the ring announcer? Of course not. But I do think that's a little detail that would help. So from there, I almost forgot this person before we started this show, but we have to talk about Lillian Garcia. So Leonard, I'll let you start with Lillian.
There was a handful that wasn't on your list I was going to mention when we got to the end.
Right.
Lillian Garcia being one. I know she gets a lot of flack for some of the screw-ups that she did, but she was there for a long time during, I think, a key period. She does have a distinctive voice, especially since she's, a female. And there's not a lot of ring announcers, at least at the point that she came in. Now that's becoming more common. It seems like, especially with WWE, because now they have female wrestlers. They're not taking the model and the fitness model and the Playboy model and teaching them how to wrestle.
Right.
They still want those ladies around.
Right.
So they're using them as ring announcers and backstage interviewers and other capacities because they're not doing a whole lot of ballets, even though they've done more recently with ballets like Lana and Zelina Vega than they had in the past. But anyway, Lillian was kind of right before that, and she was in the Divas era, and you would occasionally see her participate in the photo shoots and the videos and different things, but not a lot. She was kind of separate from the Divas, and they never dressed her slutty. She was always in nice dresses. And I think there was a class to her. She could also sing. I know that she sang America the Beautiful at the beginning of a few shows. The fact that she, I don't know what her exact Latina background is. Garcia, of course, is a Hispanic name. But she was able to kind of roll the R's a little on some of the different Latino wrestlers, Hispanic wrestlers that they had. And just to mention while we're here, the one that you didn't have on here that I was going to mention was Melissa Santos from Lucha Underground. And of course, her also having a Latina background was able to roll the R's. There's a lot of Mexican wrestlers over there. So that was an asset for her. That's sort of a side thing. We're talking about Lillian right now. But I liked Lillian. And I think she was maybe, if you want to rank, go timeline wise, other than Justin Roberts, she was probably the last ring announcer that to me was a prominent name and that I could pick their voice out of the lineup and who I knew, who they were when I saw them.
Yeah, and she was good. She's a pretty lady, and she had a distinct voice, like you said. I almost think that, and this is not a knock, but I almost think like she should have been like the singer they used all the time. Like they have a ring announcer that they use all the time. Why not have somebody to sing the national anthem or sing America the Beautiful or whatever it may be? Because that's where her strength is. Like she's a very good singer and she did really well all the times that she was there.
Yeah, she had a couple albums, right? But I don't think they really promoted them very heavy.
No, definitely not. So let's move on to Michael Buffer. And we're obviously skipping ahead, but or skipping back in time, I should say. But Michael Buffer, he wasn't a permanent ring announcer, obviously. WCW would use him for main events and pay-per-views mainly. But, I mean, he's Michael Buffer. He demands a high paycheck to do what he does and to say his, famous phrase. And he does it really well. There's a guy who I don't know how much investment he has in the sports, or in this case wrestling, that he does his jobs for. I don't know how much he loves it or dislikes it, but he makes it work every time he does it. So there's one example of somebody who, he might not be a huge wrestling fan, I have no idea, but when he would announce those, you knew it was a main event and you knew it was big and you knew it was special. So that's all I can say. He did his job well. I do think it was better that they used him on just those types of events. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure how it would have gone if they had used him all the time for every show, but what do you think?
Well, he was when I mentioned, there's two names I think of. Howard Finkel is one. The other is Michael Buffer. Even though he wasn't a permanent announcer for WCW, he did boxing, did MMA, does other things. But exactly what you said, when you heard Michael Buffer, you knew it was a big time match. You knew it was special. You knew it was something because they only brought him in on those rare occasions for those big time matchups.
Right.
So what we were talking about, he adds such a weight to it when you hear him and you see him. I think more of a weight than Fink because Fink did his regular job, So when you saw Michael Buffer, you were like, I gotta watch this match. That's Michael Buffer, regardless of anything else around it. So even though he didn't have the longevity, just the way they used him, I think, was extremely smart. Even though I know he cost a lot of money, but that was one thing WCW did for a point. They didn't care how much stuff cost.
Right.
So that's the thing with Buffer. There was just such a specialness there with him.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what, Leonard? If there's anybody that I missed, there's a couple more names. You know what? We'll do my last two names. I'm going to loop them together here, and there's a reason for that. That would be David Penzer and Gary Michael Cappetta. Mm-hmm. And the reason I loop them together is because, honestly, I like both of those announcers. They to me, when I hear those voices, I think WCW, old school NWA. That's what I think of. I think of that company. And it brings me right back to that period of time. They were great at what they did. I really do. I would say if you were going to do Howard Finkel as a 1A, I would put these guys at, maybe a 1B together. But the reason I loop them together is I really don't know if I could tell the difference between their voices. If you played them to me right now, and if they ever listen to this or see this, they would probably get mad at that. But I legitimately, if you played both of their voices right now, I probably wouldn't be able to tell you who is who.
Well, we've talked about it before. I was more of a WCW guy than a WWE guy growing up. You were more WWE. So Gary Michael Cappetta was the voice that I knew and that I loved. So yeah, he was their version of Finkel, at least for the period that he was there, which was late 80s, early 90s. Dave Penzer was mid to late 90s, I think, until the end. I actually just watched the first episode of Thunder the other night just because I watch so much random stuff on the network. Because
that's why the network's great.
Yeah, and they mentioned David Penzer, and I go, "Oh, Dave Penzer," because I forgot him when we were making these lists up. So I was like, "Yeah, Dave Penzer, he was there for a long time." So again, kind of the same thing with you. Like both of them are the voices of WCW, I think, together. I would like to think I could pick their names, their voices out if I heard both of them. I would like to think that. I'm pretty sure I could do Cappetta because, again, he was more my guy because I was more NWA, WCW. But both of them, when you think WCW and you say ring announcer, those are the names that probably come to mind even more than Michael Buffer for most people. But yeah, they were great. And one more name to throw out here before we move on, at least, is Mike McGurk, who we've talked about in the past on other shows.
Absolutely.
But she's probably the first female ring announcer that I remember. There might have been others before her. But she was also did commentary and backstage stuff and came from a wrestling family. Her father was a promoter. And in shoot interviews, if anybody's ever asked about her, they have nothing but good things to say. She has nothing but good things to say about the guys she worked with in the back and how well they treated her. And again, she has, I think, a distinctive voice, especially for a woman. And she had very eye-catching outfits. She was always, I don't know, it was like she was going to she was a blackjack dealer, like going to a prom for blackjack dealers or something. It's kind of what it looked like, the suits that she had. But very, very distinctive, and I was always a huge fan of Mike McGurk.
Yeah, no, she was really good, and I just associate her with Coliseum Video because that's like mostly what you would see her and hear her on was Coliseum Video.
Yeah, she was definitely the B show.
Yeah,
level person behind Fink for them during the 80s.
Right. So from there, we need to move on to Backstage Interviewers, and I will just say, I'll start off by saying one of my biggest pet peeves with backstage interviewers today versus who we would see in the past, and that is the end of the interview when they are just looking off into the distance and have to give some weird, fake, artificial expression, or they have to smile or shake their head or look like they're upset, and they don't look at the camera. And I know that that's a directive that they're given now. They're not allowed to look at the camera
Mhm.
like Mean Gene would do. And we'll talk about Mean Gene, obviously. But I hate that. I think it looks stupid. It bothers me every time because they're being forced to give this like, or like this fake expression that just looks completely idiotic to me. But that's my opinion. Do you notice that, Leonard? Or do you not care?
Yeah, it doesn't really bother me too much, but yeah, I think it's the fact that they're being directed to act and they're not actors. Where
Right.
if you just allowed them to have a natural response, I think it would be a lot better than telling them to do that. And as far as the not looking to the camera thing, I'm a print journalist, but we do some camera stuff, and actually we're told, don't have someone look directly in the camera as they talk, just because it looks static and weird. I usually try to do something where if I'm shooting someone with my phone, I've got it here and I'm like, talk to me, so they at least look like they're looking off a little bit. Uh,
Right.
that just looks a little more natural. So as far as that goes, but I get what you're saying. It's more like they're kind of doing it at the end of a take where it's supposed to be a natural reaction that isn't a natural reaction, and therefore it doesn't look right. So
Because
yeah.
they don't say like, okay, Michael, back to you,
Hmm.
or anything like. I
Yeah,
don't know.
right. It just ends.
I don't know why we got rid of that. I would really love for somebody to explain that to me, because now when it ends, it's just them standing there. And like I don't understand how that's better. Like that would be my question to Vince. Why
Yeah.
is one better than the other?
I mean, they still do that in other sports. If football, you go to the sideline reporter, they'll do their little bit and then say, back to you in the booth, or back to you, Al, or whoever.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, I mean,
Which
I
makes
don't know if
sense.
that's more of we don't want to be like other sports, or just something that got in his craw. Again, from everything I've listened to, weird things get in Vince's craw that he doesn't like, and you just don't do it.
Yeah, and I'll talk about. I'll give my, obviously my opinion on Mean Gene here as I talk about one of my other points. And to me, again, like with ring announcers, to me, this is Mean Gene and everyone else.
Yeah.
Like that's, I mean, and one of the reasons why Mean Gene was so iconic and so great at what he did was you could tell every time he did an interview that he loved what he was doing, and he loved the product. He loved the business he was in. There was never a doubt. He was committed to the storylines just like the talent was. He would get in their face and say, what do you think you're doing? What happened out there? Like that kind of thing. He would challenge them. That really doesn't happen anymore as much. And when they do challenge the talent, they have to look afraid. They have to look very diminutive, very, they have to like retreat. And I don't believe a lot of the backstage interviewers today. I just don't believe that they care about the product because, and, tell me I'm wrong, this is very much a stepping stone position now. You don't see a lot of people signing on to these positions because, hey, I want to be a backstage interviewer for the rest of my career. And I get why they want to use it as a stepping stone, but that's what it is now. They either want to they want to be a talent, or maybe they want to be a commentator, or maybe they want to go into other forms of journalism, or in the case of Jonathan Coachman, he went to ESPN. They want to go to other things, and this is a way they can add to their resume.
Right.
And I think you can see that in a lot of these backstage interviewers. That's my point. As you can tell that this is not what they love. They're just here to do a job. And unfortunately for fans like myself, and I'm assuming Leonard, we grew up with Mean Gene. so what do you think?
Well, when you were a kid playing wrestler, or even now, if you're doing something like a wrestling bit, let me tell you something, Mean Gene. Like
Right.
that's how you start.
Right.
that came from Hulk Hogan, of course.
Right.
Even like, I have a lot of fans who aren't wrestling fans, but they watched it when they were a kid, and they know. Let me tell you something, Mean Gene.
They know
Everybody,
Mean Gene.
yeah, everybody knows that. A friend of mine who's in the Navy was excited because off his base in Connecticut, where he's at, there was a burger joint called Mean Gene's that I don't think it was affiliated with him, but I think it was named after him for what he was telling me. But like all the guys would go eat at Mean Gene's because it was called Mean Gene's.
That's funny.
Because again, they all are from our era. They grew up with him. So yeah, he had a distinctive voice. He had a distinctive style. He had a very much a sense of humor to him. He had great relationships with a lot of the different guys, like Hulk Hogan being one.
Yeah.
He knew when to let a guy talk, and he knew when he had to prod guys with questions who weren't as good of a talker.
Absolutely.
And he could do other stuff. He did commentary. He did ring announcing.
Yeah.
If it was anything with your voice, Mean Gene could do it for you. So he was, had different skills to him. And again, longevity. He was there forever and a day. And anytime that they would do special reunion shows, they would bring him back. The WrestleMania X7 gimmick battle royal, that was Mean Gene and Bobby Heenan on commentary.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that's because Gorilla had passed by that point.
And I have to say that was weird to hear Mean Gene on commentary. I have to admit.
But he did at other points too. And again, they would bring him back for special occasions because everybody, if it was anything retro, I assume one of the first calls was like, well, we got to see if we can get Mean Gene to come in and do the interviews and stuff. So
right.
Yeah, just iconic for all the reasons that we talked about.
Absolutely. And so we'll start by mentioning just some of the names. I'm going to kind of loop a lot of them in together here.
Yeah, because a lot of these are very nondescript.
Right, like you have Charlie Caruso and Kayla Braxton, and I want to say JoJo Offerman. I don't know, she does ring announcing, as well.
As well, yeah. She is the only thing I really know about her. She's the one who's with Bray Wyatt now.
Right. And again, they are all fine, to a certain extent, but I think we're in a trend now, a very run-of-the-mill string of backstage interviewers, and it's pretty faces versus people that are really passionate about the product, and people like Mean Gene. And unfortunately, we just have to keep making that comparison, or at least I do. And I like Charlie Caruso. I mean, she's gorgeous. She really is a very pretty lady, and so I like I like watching her for that reason. Sorry, but other than that, I just, there's really, like you were saying, there's not much I can say other than they are there and they do what they're told.
The first Raw that Charlie Caruso ever did, when I was online, different message groups and things, Facebook groups, Twitter groups, what have you, people were like, who is that? Oh my God, she's so gorgeous. Who is that? So people were noticing her right off the bat. But then like 2 weeks later, you weren't really talking about her because you saw her.
Right.
That's it. You saw her. Oh yeah, she's pretty. And once that was over, there wasn't, and that's not to belittle her any. I just don't think that she brings a whole lot more to the table, along with the other names that you mentioned, other than the fact that they are very attractive. So initially they draw your eye. But again, what else are they doing? Do they have a sense of humor to them? Do they have a personality to them? Do they have a certain special relationship with some of the guys? Everything that we're talking about with Mean Gene is no for this three group of names. So of the three, Charlie's definitely the one that I think could continue to develop and continue to grow if they let her to do that, but they probably won't let her do that. But I think she could get to the point where she would have a personality.
Yeah, and
I think she doesn't, but she doesn't have one that comes across on television, at least of now. I think if you would ask any fan, tell me about Charlie, it's, well, she's hot and she holds a microphone. I don't think there's much else to her, and that's nothing against her.
No,
that's what they're letting her be.
Right, and you wonder, same with the ring announcers, how many of these people who've gotten the directive to not be showy at all, one wonders, like, oh man, if I just was able to add this or add that, you wonder if any of them really want to do that, or maybe they don't care. Maybe they're just looking to go on to a career in broadcasting or reporting or something of that nature. So, which is fine. So other than this, you kind of like have a trend for a while there where WWE would use, really good looking women to do a lot of these interviews. And it got to a point where some of them, clearly wanted to be talent, but it's like, well, you're not very good at this. So let's find some work for you. We'll have you do these backstage interviews and, we'll keep you on because people like to see you. And again, we're not, that might not sound very good when we say stuff like that, but if somebody can tell me that's not why, then I will certainly stand up and say I'm wrong. But when you like Christy Hemme, for example, and Maria Kanellis is another one, they can certainly do stuff in the ring. Could they do stuff in the ring with some of the talent we have today? Probably not. It would be my first guess, but they did a lot of backstage interviews. So what do you think about those two in particular, or anybody else like that?
Christy Hemme is someone who she started out working in the ring and she won the Diva Search competition. So like they wanted to use her. And then she went to Impact and she kind of migrated to being a backstage interview and a ring announcer. And I think that was probably the best uses of her because, again, she's a very beautiful woman. She has a very engaging smile and a very engaging personality.
Yeah.
So I think when she's in the ring with the microphone, your eyes drawn to her, and she seemed to enjoy what she was doing, which we talked about with some of the others who act like it's a job.
Right.
That wasn't her. So I think with her, it was a good career move. Then, for example, Brandy Rhodes, who was Eden Styles,
right.
She started out as a ring announcer because I think they wanted to use her because she was Cody's wife. And then when they left, she started working in the ring more and as a valet and doing different things. So kind of the reverse direction of Christy Hemme. But I think she's more comfortable doing what she's doing now than what she was doing before as a ring announcer and some of the backstage stuff that she was doing. Maria, I think she's great as a valet for Mike Bennett. A lot of people didn't like that storyline that they were doing with them, and she was pregnant and all that. But man, she played the character well. And
right.
Considering that before her character was the fact that she was, dumb as a bag of rocks, and then she became like this shrewish vixen. I mean, that's the same person. So she's got some acting talent there at least. And again, incredibly beautiful. One of probably my favorites of all time, just on being a hot chick in the business. And I actually got to meet her one time at a show, and she gives off crazy body heat. She's like standing in front of a blast furnace. I don't know why, but she's just really warm. And it was one of the few times I was tongue-tied. I mean, we've talked about all these different people that I've met on different shows and celebrities too, not just wrestlers. And she was one of the few times that I just didn't quite know what to say just because of how incredibly gorgeous she is in person.
Right.
Again, I think you're right in the fact that a lot of times it's we want you around, we don't know what to do with you, so we're going to stick you here. Sometimes it works, like I think it worked in the case of Christy Hemme. Sometimes it doesn't, and like Maria and Brandy Rhodes, and they're better as a valet or a talent of some sort. Even in the limited in ring, if you use them in the right way.
Right.
And I think that became a thing with both Maria and Brandy. They figured out, they're not going to go in and have classics with Becky Lynch, but if you put them in a mixed tag, with their guy and allow them to have certain matches, then that works.
Right. And, with Christy Hemme, when that competition was going on and she was introduced, I mean, I remember I was watching pretty avidly at that point, and to me, it was really obvious early on.
Mm-hmm.
Next to all the other girls.
I mean, she came in fourth, I think, but
to me, it was like, okay, if anybody's going to stick around, it's going to be her.
Yeah.
To me, it was clear. But anywho, so again, we'll just loop a bunch of these names into one, and we'll just kind of comment on them as we see fit here. So throughout the years, as we've said, we've had a lot of different names. We've had people like Todd Pettengill. We've had Michael P.S. Hayes, otherwise known as Doc Hendricks.
Mm-hmm.
We've had Kevin Kelly, and that's, the WWE side. So, and Sean Mooney going back even further. So I really enjoy Sean Mooney. I think that, he has a very distinct voice, and he also, at least he did have a podcast. I don't know if he still does it or not, but he did have a podcast. And, again, all these guys, like, it was cool that they brought Todd Pettengill back for the NXT In Your House event. That was pretty fun to see.
And NWA brought Sean Mooney back as well earlier this year. And
right.
It was really cool to see him on there.
Absolutely. And Kevin Kelly, as we talked about in the commentators episodes, he's somebody who obviously really liked the business, and he does commentary for Ring of Honor and does stuff in Japan as well. And all these guys, to me, did really well with their jobs. And sometimes they'll go on to commentary. In the case of Michael Cole, he obviously started out as a backstage interviewer and would go on to do commentary. And, you see that a lot, where these guys start out in one way and they want to eventually become a commentator. In the case of Todd Pettengill, he had a radio show. I think he still does. And they wanted to move in a different direction. But these are all guys that I thought did pretty well and made a name for themselves and were memorable in that way. It's kind of a forgotten era of announcers that stuck out to me. So under all those names, Leonard, what do you think?
Well, Sean Mooney and Todd Pettengill also kind of fit into a subset of this category, which I would call hosts, because they hosted a lot of things. I believe, what was that Saturday morning show? Was it Live Wire that Todd Pettengill hosted? Because he would it was similar to, Primetime Wrestling, where Bobby Heenan and Gorilla Monsoon served as hosts. And he was partnered with Stephanie Wyant for a while. I remember her. She was around for the first In Your House. But, he was a host. Sean Mooney was always like in the command center or the control center, with all the screens behind him, or sitting at a desk, and he would preview the upcoming pay-per-view and the big matches and things like that. So that was a little bit different, that hosting subset, where they were kind of filling in the gaps or throwing it to the different matches and stuff like that. But yeah, both those guys stick out. I think a lot of it was they were there at the right time. So our generation really remembers them. And I always thought Todd Pettengill was more annoying than Sean Mooney.
I would agree with you.
I think it was just his personality, or the way the personality was coming across.
He definitely tried to be more of a comic.
Yes, more comic, and I think more up. I mean, Sean Mooney was more the guy at the NFL desk, giving you the scores like at halftime, or it's the NFL news break on CBS, and here's the scores around the league. Right. Like that's what Sean Mooney was doing. While Todd Pettengill was like a morning DJ. Yes. The comedy, the energy. And I think that's probably what they were looking for at that time, and a counterpoint to Mooney. But, especially at the time, I don't think I liked Pettengill. In retrospect, I do. And, again, Mooney, Pettengill are just of our generation. We know those people, and they were great for their time period.
Right. And, Doc Hendricks, Michael P.S. Hayes, I think it was a good move that they cut his hair. I think that it was a cool character. I mean, looking back on it now, everybody really knows him, Michael P.S.
Yeah,
Hayes.
It always seemed weird to me because being an NWA fan, I knew that was Michael Hayes. I'm like, that's just Michael Hayes. Why are you not calling him Michael Hayes?
Right.
Because like everyone knew who he was. But again, that was that mentality I've heard of, that a lot of people in WWE were like, oh, well, he's not one of our guys, so people don't know who he is.
Right.
Like I know Jim Cornette talked a lot about that. Like when they used Terry Funk as like Chainsaw Charlie.
Right.
And as soon as he emerged, people were chanting Terry Funk.
Right.
And they were like, nobody knows who Terry Funk is, even though he worked for them, in the mid '80s. But I think it's a similar thing, I guess.
Yeah, they could have just called him Michael Hayes with short hair.
Yeah.
But they gave him an.
And again, he always wore like these powder blue tuxedos.
Yeah.
And these really just terrible looking suits. Considering that, of course, he had the rock and roll outfits when he was Michael Hayes. So I don't know. maybe it was a rib even. Like, we're going to hire Michael Hayes, but we're going to call him Doc Hendricks, and we're going to dress him like he's going to the junior high prom.
Well, I think they talked about it on some of the podcasts I listened to, how he got at least the Hendrix part. I forget off the top of my head, like, how he got the Doc part. But the Hendrix part came from the fact, like, they asked him what sort of musicians that he liked. And he's like, what, like Jimi Hendrix? And he's like, oh, yeah, Doc, like, I forget, that they just kind of combined two different things. That's basically how.
Doc Hendrix. Well, I mean, I think it's kind of a cool name. I don't know if it's, again, if you would have gave that to a new guy, maybe that would have worked. But even as a kid, having grown up in NWA more, I was just like, well, that's just Michael Hayes. Why is he being Michael Hayes? So that threw me off.
So we'll go on to some other names here. Maybe some more non-WWE names.
Mm-hmm.
There's people like Jeremy Borash, and in AEW right now you have Alex Marvez. Back in the day for WCW, you had Lee Marshall. So those are three. Like, Jeremy Borash obviously has talent beyond just backstage interviews. He's done a lot of producing, and I think is he with WWE still? I'm not sure if he is. I know.
I think last I knew he was, but that can change from moment to moment.
Right.
Of course, most people remember him from his work in Impact, and yes, along with he was a ring announcer, he was backstage, he was on the commentary desk, he was doing the commercial bits with Don West. Again, he has producer abilities. So really,
very much a jack of all trades.
Yeah, he seems like a guy that kind of he did what he had to do to fill in. And I think we talked about this on commentary with Eric Bischoff. Bischoff was the same way. It was he started out in advertising with AWA, and they had him doing interviews because he was the only guy with a suit in the back, and so it was sort of that he got into being a vice president and a producer, but it helps if you can jump on the desk if you need to, or do the interviews if you need to. And I think Jeremy Borash is one of those guys. So he has a lot of talent that way. And just mentioned Lee Marshall. I think he's got a really distinctive voice.
Oh, yeah.
And he did some commentary for WCW when he was over there.
Yeah.
And when we did the Tito Santana episode, he was the ring announcer for, I believe it was WrestleMania 2, at least for the portion that Tito was at.
Right.
Because I immediately went, oh, dude, that's Lee Marshall.
Right.
And I was going to mention that, and I don't think I did.
Right.
So, yeah, Lee's someone with a very distinctive, big booming radio announcer type voice.
Yes, absolutely. And so other than, and Alex Marvez does fine. I think, he's nondescript, but I mean, I think he does fine over there. And then you have other people that throughout the years, they've done it here and there. And like, you had Missy Hyatt would do some interviews from time to time. And obviously she was a pretty face, at least then.
But again, very much knew the business. Family, her parents were promoters, if memory serves. She was married to Eddie Gilbert, had relationships with a lot of other different wrestlers. So she knew the business. And I think that came across with her. She wasn't another pretty face. She not only understood the business, she understood her role.
Yes.
Either if she was working as a valet or if she was working backstage. She knew what she was there to do. So I think Missy Hyatt, probably because of a lot of the things with her, I think is underrated or undercounted by a lot of people. But there was a lot of talent there. She knew what she was doing.
Yeah, that like 90 to 95 era, she is pretty like one of the things you associate with that period of WCW for sure.
Yeah.
And you've had people like Bruce Pritchard has done some backstage interviews. I forget one of the weird characters that he did that he's talking about on this podcast.
I want to say, is it Reno Riggins?
Reno Rogers.
Reno Rogers, maybe.
We'll put up the name.
Yes, yeah. It was supposed to be a takeoff on JR, right?
I don't
That's
know.
what I'm thinking of. No.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure if I think it was just a character that they were hoping would get over, but it didn't happen that way.
Yeah, and of course he's most famous for being Brother Love.
Brother Love, right?
And a lot of different people have like their interview segments, but they're usually wrestlers. He was a non-wrestler who had an interview segment, and again, a lot of really big storylines and characters went through the Brother Love show. and he was the original manager of the Undertaker as well. So, and that was a very distinct character. I think a lot of people remember Brother Love, who was watching at that time. You know, my buddy Dan, who I've mentioned a lot. One of the few live shows he got to go to when he was a kid was in Wheeling, West Virginia, and one of the things he most remembers was there was a Brother Love show there.
Right.
Because they had this. Because when you got in, he saw the set and went, "Oh, they're going to do a Brother Love show." And that's like one of the few things he remembers from the show is seeing a brother. And I forget now who he told me who it was, like who the guest was, but you know, seeing the Brother Love show.
I was at a WWF show where Brother Love show was recorded as well, and yeah, you know, we should do a show sometime just on interview segments and all the different ones.
Yeah, there's been a ton.
Right, and you know, you had Terry Runnels did backstage interviews for a time, and now Tony Schiavone, he does more in-ring interviews. But
yeah, and that's one thing I do like about AEW.
Yeah,
they're not doing like the old-fashioned studio show, because Tony used to do the interviews for WCW Saturday Night. You know, they would come out to the commentary desk, and he would do the interview there, and then they would go to the ring, or they would come from the ring after their match and talk to Tony.
Right.
So I like the fact that, you know, they don't have that type of setup, but they're using Tony either on the entrance stage or in the ring to do those types of interviews. So I like that. They're not 100% retro, but they're throwing in a taste of that works for them.
Right. And, you know, doing a tangent here, two names that we forgot to mention on our commentators episode that I thought of when I was researching this. And these guys, you know, at least one of them does mostly commentary, but the other one did a lot of hosting stuff, and that'd be Lord Alfred Hayes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he did commentary, he did hosting gigs, you know, he did a lot of different stuff. And
yeah, he did backstage. I mean, at the very first WrestleMania, he was like I don't know why I would even call it. It was like the tertiary guy.
Right.
Like he was standing there with like the program in his hand, and like they would throw it to him, and he would talk, and then he would throw it to like the ring announcer. Right. You go back and you watch the first WrestleMania. But if my memory serves on him, you know, he was a wrestler back in the day, and was very loyal to Vince Sr.
Right.
And you know, Vince Jr. kept a lot of those guys around who were very loyal to his dad and found him something to do. And Lord Alfred Hayes was one of them. He was also Vince's sidekick on TNT, Tuesday Night Titans. He was the epic man to Vince's Johnny Carson.
Right. And Nigel McInnes is one we forgot to mention on the commentary.
Oh, yeah, he's more commentary, but I think he does a good job.
He absolutely does. So, I mean, do you have any other names, Leonard, that you wanted to?
Yeah, any other name I think to mention from the list that we didn't, premium one is Renee Young.
Yes.
You know, she did a lot of hosting.
Right.
And what they've done recently is what I kind of call the talking head shows that you see on ESPN, where you have a host and two or three guys and you throw topics at them.
Right.
And she did a lot of that, and she was good at that. And of course, she also did commentary. And she herself has said, "I'm not great on commentary. I'm good as the host. I'm good doing the interview." And I think she was. I think more than being pretty, she had an engaging personality. I think she enjoyed what she did. And I think that came across with her. I always did like
she knew her role, to quote her.
Yeah, and she knew what she could do, and she could do that well. Again, I didn't really care for her in commentary, but I liked her in the other positions they used her. And if you think about the fact that she was the one sitting at the desk with people, like when they would do the pre-shows, I know a lot of times they were using Ric Flair and Booker T and keeping those guys in check.
Right.
And making sure they didn't drown on or go too long or
right.
get weird or whatever. You know, that speaks a lot for her abilities as a host and having hosted different things over the years myself. You know, we used to do a podcast that I hosted. I've hosted improv shows. That's a tough role to keep various people in check while making sure everything's running on time.
Absolutely. So, you know, just to cap it off here, I mean, we're at a point now where I do think, at least certainly in backstage interviews and to a lesser degree, maybe the ring announcers, these are two areas that can be spruced up a little bit. There can be some more personality added. There can be people in those positions that might add a little bit more legitimacy or a little bit more, you know, spunk or pizzazz, whatever you want to say, to the positions to make them more engaging, not necessarily to take away from the talent, certainly not, but I do think it could add a little bit more flair and a little bit more entertainment and personality to the show. That's my opinion. But hopefully we covered everybody. Leonard, do you want any final thoughts here?
You're exactly right. I think the positions that we're talking about, ring announcer and backstage interviewer, can just be like, the cherry on top of the sundae. They're never going to be the focal point.
Right.
But they can add something with their personality, with their engagement with the different wrestlers, with little extra bits that they can bring. And I think that's only helps the product. I don't get what we've talked about in the past, the idea of we don't want these people to have personalities or names for people to know them.
Right.
Why does having a faceless droning voice, how does that help your product as opposed to someone that people like to see and have something notable about them that people know? Again, like we talked about, everyone knows Fink's voice. Right. Everybody knows, let me tell you something, Mean Gene. Everybody knows that. And not only did it make those guys iconic, but it helped the product.
Right. So, and yeah, when I was a kid and I was pretending to be a wrestler, I would always imagine myself becoming the champion with the Fink's voice.
Right. Again, what we were talking about earlier, does that sound good in your head?
Right.
And and you pictured the Fink doing it. So yeah, I mean, the people who were icons at it, and they came up during a period where they were allowed that freedom, where they're not today. And like we mentioned with some people, including Shirley Caruso, she's just kind of there, but she has, I think, the ability. She has a high ceiling.
Yeah,
if they would allow her to achieve it.
Yeah, I know. I agree. So hopefully you enjoyed this episode. If there's anybody we didn't mention that you think we should have, please let us know. And also make sure to check out my other show, Dailies to Downloads, and have a happy new year. And for Leonard, my name is Chad, and we will see you next time for our third installment of Fever Dream matches. Thank you.